Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sterile hum against the raw ache in my chest. My son, David, was gone, just gone. I sat numbly by his bedside, the crisp white sheets a stark contrast to the vibrant life he'd lived. Stephanie, his wife, stood across the room, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. "Yes, it's done," she said, her voice oddly brisk. Finally, she hung up, and the silence that followed was heavier than grief, heavier than the news itself. Turning to me, a chillingly composed look on her face, she said, "Eleanor, I need to discuss something with you." I nodded dumbly, still lost in the swirling fog of loss. How could I discuss anything? My world had just shattered. Stephanie pulled up a chair, her movements precise, almost robotic. "Now that David's passed," she said, the word catching in her throat as if it were an inconvenience, "we need to talk about the house. The house. My son's house. Where he'd brought his new bride. Where they'd planned their future. The house where I'd stayed these past few weeks, helping David through his illness." A wave of nausea washed over me. "The house," I echoed, my voice thin and reedy. "Yes," Stephanie replied, her tone clipped. "I need you to be out by tomorrow." My breath hitched. Out? Where was I supposed to go, Stephanie? I pleaded. "I have nowhere else to go. Give me a few days, at least." A flicker of something I couldn't quite place, annoyance, impatience, crossed her face. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "but I need the space. Julian and I have plans." Julian? Of course, Stephanie's fiancé, the man she'd been seeing for barely a year. He'd always seemed uneasy around David, almost resentful. Now, here he was, a phantom presence looming over this cruel eviction. "But the funeral," I stammered, my mind reeling. "It's tomorrow." "Where will I?" Stephanie waved a dismissive hand. "You can stay in a hotel," she said, her voice smooth and unyielding. "I'd even pay for a night or two. Consider it a parting gift." A parting gift. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. My own son's wife was throwing me out of his house, the day after he died, and calling it a gift. I stared at her, at the perfect composure of her face, the careful arrangement of her hair, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't grief. This was something else entirely. A calculated coldness. A chilling indifference to my pain. I managed a weak nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Fine," I whispered, the word barely audible. Stephanie stood up, smoothing down her skirt. "Good," she said briskly. "I'll have the movers there first thing in the morning. I need to start making arrangements." She didn't meet my eyes. Arrangements? For what? Exactly. To erase every trace of David from the house, to replace him with Julian, to build their new life on the ashes of my son's. The thought pierced me like a shard of glass. "Don't worry, Eleanor," Stephanie continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You'll find somewhere to go. You're a resourceful woman." The faintest hint of a smirk played on her lips. Resourceful. She thought I was helpless, a burden to be discarded. She thought I was nothing. Looking at her, at the triumph barely concealed behind her carefully crafted mask of grief, I felt a flicker of something else ignite within me. Not anger, not yet, but something harder, colder. Resolve. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't plead. I would leave, as she demanded. but I wouldn't forget. And somewhere, deep down, a tiny seed of defiance began to take root. I wouldn't be discarded so easily. I had helped David with that house, more than she knew, and somehow, some way, I would make sure she knew it too. I gathered my few belongings, my hands trembling, as I walked out of the sterile, brightly lit hospital room, leaving behind the still form of my son. I looked back at Stephanie one last time. She was already back on her phone, her voice a low murmur. She didn't even glance up. The hallway stretched out before me, long and cold, a stark reflection of the emptiness that had settled in my heart. But within that emptiness, a tiny spark of something else began to flicker. A spark of hope, perhaps, or maybe something darker. Something that whispered of justice, of retribution, of a future where Stephanie's smug smile would be replaced by something else entirely, something like regret. The air outside was crisp and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Christmas felt a lifetime away. But as I stepped out into the unknown, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't defeated. Not yet. Rain lashed against the windows of my son's house, a relentless drumming that mirrored the ache in my heart. Just yesterday, Stephanie, my daughter-in-law, had stood on this very porch, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she told me, "This is no place for you anymore, Eleanor. It's best you leave." She claimed it was for the best, to give her space to grieve, but her eyes, cold and calculating, told a different story. Now, the night before David's funeral, I found myself back here, a trespasser in the home where I had raised my son. I had to retrieve a few personal belongings, a small suitcase of memories I couldn't bear to leave behind. The key, thankfully, still worked. The house felt empty, hollowed out not just by David's absence, but by something colder. I moved through the familiar rooms, each step echoing in the silence. The living room, once filled with David's laughter and the comforting clutter of family life, was sterile, almost unnervingly tidy. "It's different," I whispered to myself, my voice catching in my throat. I reached for the framed photo on the mantelpiece, my hand hovering over the glass. It was David as a boy, grinning gap-toothed, a baseball clutched in his hand. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the outline of his small face. That's when I noticed it, the space beside it, where another photo usually sat. It was a picture of David and me, taken on his graduation day. Gone. My heart sank. I checked the shelves, the side tables, the walls. Every single photograph of me and David, had vanished erased, as if I had never existed in this house, in his life. "She can't just erase me," I muttered, a flicker of anger starting to burn through the numbness. I moved to the hallway, drawn by a prickling unease. The family photo wall, a chaotic collage of birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments, was bare. The nails remained, tiny, accusing points in the otherwise blank wall. "Every single one," I whispered, my voice choked with disbelief. Even the Christmas photo, the one where David and I were wearing ridiculous reindeer antlers, laughing until our sides hurt. Gone. I stumbled into the kitchen, the cold towel biting into my bare feet. The scent of David's favorite coffee still lingered faintly in the air, a phantom limb of memory. I opened the cupboard where I kept my special blend, the one I always brought over when I visited. Empty. She's really doing this, I said aloud, the words a disbelieving gasp. My mug, the one with the chipped handle that David always teased me about, was gone too. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't just the photos. It was everything. Every trace of my presence in this house, in David's life, was being systematically erased. Who are you talking to? Stephanie's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the quiet. I turned, my hand instinctively clutching the framed photo of young David. Julian stood beside her, his face a mask of awkward discomfort. I was just collecting a few things, I stammered, feeling a blush creep up my neck. Stephanie stepped into the kitchen, her eyes raking over me with undisguised contempt. You shouldn't be here, Eleanor, she said, her voice flat. This isn't your home anymore. Julian shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my gaze. Stephanie's right, Eleanor, he mumbled. It's best if you leave. I'll just be a moment, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My gaze landed on the empty spot on the counter where my cookie jar usually sat. The ceramic rooster, a silly, sentimental thing David had given me years ago, was gone. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about grief. This was a deliberate, cruel act of erasure. Stephanie crossed her arms, her expression hardening. There's nothing here for you anymore, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Everything that belonged to David is mine now. The casual possessiveness of her words, the way she claimed ownership of my son's entire life, sent a chill down my spine. He wouldn't want you here, she added, her voice laced with a cruel finality. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, my hand tightening on the photo frame. The image of my smiling son blurred through the tears that welled in my eyes. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tell her how wrong she was, how much she didn't understand. But the words caught in my throat. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the photo clutched tightly in my hand. I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering the few remaining items that held a piece of my son. A worn sweater, a book of poetry he'd given me for Christmas, a small, hand-painted ceramic bird he'd made in elementary school. Each object felt like a shard of glass, sharp and painful to the touch. As I walked out into the rain, the weight of my grief threatened to crush me. But beneath the sorrow, something else was beginning to stir, a quiet resolve, a flicker of steel in my heart. Stephanie thought she had won. She thought she could erase me, erase my connection to David. She was wrong. I had something she didn't know about, something that would change everything, something that would ensure that David's memory and my place in his life would not be so easily forgotten. I didn't know exactly how, not yet, but as the rain washed over me, a single thought echoed through my mind. She would regret this. She would regret every single photograph she took down, every single memory she tried to erase. Christmas was coming, and I had a plan. Rain lashed against the church windows, mirroring the storm inside me. Just yesterday, Stephanie, my daughter-in-law, had practically shoved me out of my own son's house, telling me I needed to move on. Now here we were, at David's funeral, the rain a constant, dreary reminder of everything I'd lost. The priest's words washed over me, a meaningless drone against the sharp ache in my heart. I glanced at Stephanie, composed in her black dress, Julian's arm round her. She caught my and offered a thin, brittle smile. "He would have wanted us to be strong, wouldn't he?" she murmured, her voice barely audible above the hymns. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Strong. That's what David always was. He would have been devastated to see me like this, cast aside, adrift. After the service, people gathered around Stephanie, offering condolences, their voices hushed and sympathetic. I stood a little apart, feeling like a ghost in my own life. The vicar approached me, his face etched with concern. "Eleanor, dear, are you all right?" he asked gently. I managed a weak smile, just a bit overwhelmed. I replied, my voice trembling, "It's all a lot." He patted my arm. "Take your time. Grief has its own rhythm." He moved on to speak to other mourners, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which swirled like the tempest outside. How could everything have changed so quickly 1 minute? I had a son, a home, a life. The next, it was all gone. I wandered toward the back of the church, needing a moment to breathe, to escape the suffocating sympathy. As I reached the vestibule, I heard Stephanie's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Honestly, Julian, I can't believe she thought she could just stay there," she was saying. "The house is mine now. It's time for a new chapter, don't you think?" Julian chuckled. "Of course, darling. It's a beautiful house. We'll make it our own." My heart sank. They were talking about David's house, the house I had helped him buy, the house filled with memories of him growing up laughing, learning to ride his bike in the driveway. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. "I've already spoken to the estate agent," Stephanie continued, her voice laced with a chilling practicality. "We'll put it on the market as soon as everything is finalized. Hopefully, we'll get a good price. Think of what we can do with the money. A proper wedding, a honeymoon in the Maldives," she trailed off, her voice filled with a giddy excitement that grated on my raw nerves. Julian squeezed her hand. "Sounds perfect," he murmured. "Though what a bother. Where will she go?" My breath hitched. This was it. This was the moment of truth. Would Stephanie show even a flicker of compassion, a sliver of concern for the mother of her deceased husband? Stephanie sighed. A dramatic, theatrical sound. "That's not my problem anymore," she said dismissively. "She's a grown woman. She can take care of herself." Julian's reply was lost in the sudden ringing in my ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. Not her problem. I was no longer her problem. The mother of her husband, the woman who had welcomed her into the family, the woman who had grieved alongside her, was now disposable. I turned and fled, pushing through the heavy oak doors of the church and out into the driving rain. The cold water stung my face, a welcome distraction from the burning tears that streamed down my cheeks. I didn't have anywhere to go. Stephanie had made that abundantly clear. The small apartment I'd kept after my husband died had been let go months ago. I'd been staying at David's, helping him after his accident, never imagining that my own daughter-in-law would turn me out, leaving me homeless and alone. I walked blindly, the wind whipping my hair around my face, the rain soaking through my clothes. The world was a blur of gray and black, mirroring the emptiness inside me. I found myself standing at the edge of the park, shivering, lost. A young couple walked past, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces glowing with happiness. The sight of them, so carefree, so oblivious to my despair, sent a fresh wave of anguish through me. I sank onto a park bench, the cold metal seeping through my thin coat. What was I going to do? Where would I go? The questions echoed in my mind, unanswered, unanswerable. But even as I wept, a flicker of something else began to stir within me, a spark of defiance, a whisper of resolve. Stephanie thought she could just discard me, erase me from the picture. She thought she could just take everything that was rightfully mine, everything that David had worked for. She was wrong, so terribly wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. I would fight back. I would make her pay. The rain continued to fall, but I no longer felt the chill. Something had shifted inside me. Grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it was mingled with something else, something hot and fierce. The beginning of a plan, the first stirrings of revenge. Rain lashed against the kitchen window, blurring the already dreary view of the overgrown garden. "I need my privacy," Stephanie said flatly, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "So, you have until tomorrow evening to pack your things and leave." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, like the November wind whistling through the drafty window frame. I just stared at her, unable to comprehend the cruelty, the sheer audacity of it. Just yesterday, we were burying my son, her husband, David, and now, less than 24 hours later, his widow, his wife, was throwing me out of the house he and I had built together, brick by painstaking brick. But where will I go? I finally managed to ask, my voice a mere whisper. It felt like the walls were closing in, the familiar kitchen suddenly alien and hostile. Stephanie finally glanced up, her eyes cold and devoid of any trace of sympathy. "That's not my problem, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is my house now, and frankly, the sooner you're gone, the better." She went back to scrolling through her phone, her disinterest a physical blow. My David, my sweet, gentle David. How could he have married such a woman? I clutched my teacup tighter, the warmth a small comfort in the icy grip of shock. David would have wanted I started, but Stephanie cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Don't you dare bring David into this," she snapped, her voice rising sharply. "David is gone, and this house is mine." She emphasized the word mine with a possessive sneer, as if I was the intruder, the unwanted guest. "I helped David buy this house," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We poured our savings into it, years and years of hard work. I remember the day we signed the papers, the pride and joy on David's face. He had always wanted a place of his own, a sanctuary for his future family, and I, foolishly, had believed that included me. Well, you should have put it in your name then, shouldn't you?" Stephanie said with a shrug, dismissing my years of sacrifice with a single, careless gesture. "Besides," she continued, her tone softening slightly, as if she was about to offer a concession, "you'll be going to Julian's mother's for Christmas, won't you, Julian?" Stephanie's fiancé, a man I barely knew. They had met only a few months before David's accident. I had always found him unsettling, his smile too quick, his eyes too calculating. And now, his mother, a woman I had never even met, was supposed to be my refuge, my solace. I haven't made any plans yet, I stammered, my mind reeling. Well, you should, Stephanie said briskly, standing up and gathering her keys. Because, like I said, you need to be out of here by tomorrow evening. She paused at the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips. Wouldn't want to impose on my privacy. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the cold, silent kitchen. The rain continued to beat against the windows, each drop a tiny hammer blow against my already fractured heart. I sank into a chair, my body heavy with exhaustion and grief. Where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? I closed my eyes, trying to conjure up David's face, his worn smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. But all I could see was Stephanie's cold, calculating gaze, the cruel twist of her lips. The house, filled with memories of David, of happier times, now felt like a prison, a suffocating reminder of everything I had lost. I had given so much to this family, to David, to this house, and now I was being cast aside, discarded like a broken toy. The injustice of it all burned in my chest, a small, flickering flame in the vast emptiness of my grief. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, packing a few meager belongings into a suitcase. Each item I touched brought a fresh wave of memories, of David, of our life together. The chipped teacup we had bought on a weekend trip to the coast, the worn photo album filled with pictures of David as a child, the hand-wear-upon scarf he had given me for my last birthday. Each object a precious shard of the past, a reminder of everything Stephanie had stolen from me. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped, and a sliver of moonlight peeked through the clouds. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden David and I had tended together. The roses were withered and brown, their vibrant blooms long gone, a reflection of my own wilting spirit. But as I stood there, amidst the wreckage of my life, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my heart, but it was no longer consuming. It was as if, in the midst of my despair, a small seed of defiance had been planted. Stephanie thought she had won. She thought she could simply erase me from the picture, dismiss me with a wave of her hand. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the strength that lay dormant within me, the quiet resolve that years of hardship had forged. She may have the house, for now, but she hadn't broken me. And in the quiet of that moonlit kitchen, I made a promise to myself, a promise to David's memory. I would not be defeated. I would find a way to fight back. I would get my revenge, and it would be sweeter than she could ever imagine. The flicker of defiance in my chest grew stronger, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. I would find a way. I had to, for David, for myself, and for the future that Stephanie had tried to steal from me. The first step, I know, was to understand the legal complexities of David's will, and I had a feeling there was more to it than Stephanie realized. The air in David's house felt heavy, thick with the ghost of his laughter, the scent of his aftershave still clinging to the curtains. I folded his favorite sweater, the soft cashmere a comfort, against my cheek for a moment before I placed it carefully in the box. He would have wanted me to be strong, I murmured to myself, though the words felt hollow in the echoing emptiness of the house. Strong. How could I be strong when just yesterday, Stephanie, David's wife, had stood in this very spot, her face a mask of cold indifference, telling me I had to leave. "This house is mine now," she'd said, her voice sharp, "and you have no right to be here." She had looked down at me with an odd mix of triumph and pity. "You're pathetic," she'd added, the word a sting I still felt. Pathetic. I continued packing, each item a fresh wave of grief. Photographs of David as a boy, his graduation certificate, the silly little trinkets he'd collected on his travels, each one a memory, a shard of the life we had shared, now being boxed up and carried away. The legal documents lay on the bedside table, a stark reminder of the reality I now faced. David's will. I hadn't wanted to think about it, to face the cold, hard facts of his passing, but I knew I had to. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The words swam before my eyes: legalese, technical terms, the dry language of inheritance and property. "I leave my entire estate to my wife, Stephanie," it read. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, the springs groaning in protest. David, my son, he had left everything to her. I knew David loved Stephanie. He had been so happy with her, but this felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal, not just of me, but of everything we had shared as a family. I remembered the conversations David and I had had about the house, about how much it meant to him. He'd always said it would be a place for family, a place for gatherings and celebrations, a place filled with love and laughter. Now it felt cold and empty, filled only with the bitter taste of Stephanie's cruelty. "You have nothing left," Stephanie had sneered. "You're alone." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memory of her words, her face. Alone. Yes, I was alone. My son was gone, and now his wife, the woman he had loved, had turned on me, cast me out like a stray dog. I felt a surge of anger, a burning ember in the pit of my stomach. I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her take everything. I picked up the will again, scanning the pages more closely. There had to be something, some loophole, some way to fight back. David had always been meticulous, careful, precise. He wouldn't have simply left me with nothing. He wouldn't. And then I saw it. A small clause, tucked away at the bottom of the page, almost hidden amongst the dense legal jargon. It mentioned a financial contribution to the property, a sum of money that had been invested in the house. I remembered it clearly. It was a gift from me to David, a down payment to help him secure his dream home, a home I had helped him build, a home he had promised would always be open to me. A slow smile spread across my face. Stephanie hadn't known about this. She had assumed that everything belonged to David, that everything was now hers. But she was wrong, so very wrong. The clause stated that any such contribution would be returned to the contributor upon the sale of the property. The house wasn't solely David's. Part of it was mine. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of my lawyer, Mr. Harrison. "Hello, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think I've found something interesting in David's will." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, something that Stephanie might not be too happy about. I continued packing, a new sense of purpose filling me. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but now it was mingled with something else, a flicker of hope, a spark of determination. I would get what was rightfully mine. I would honor David's memory by protecting what he had cherished. This house, this home, and Stephanie. She would learn that there were some things money couldn't buy, and some debts that couldn't be ignored. Christmas was just around the corner, and I had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting holiday indeed. Rain lashed against the windows of my son's house, mirroring the storm raging inside me. "Time's up, Eleanor," Stephanie said, her voice as cold as the November wind. "Everything's packed, isn't it? Julian and I have places to be." I clutched my worn handbag, my only possession of value, now a small, velvet box containing a faded photograph of my son. "David, you can't seriously expect me to leave, Stephanie." This was David's home. She gave a brittle laugh, the sound grating on my raw nerves. Was being the operative word. "It's mine now." Each word she uttered was a fresh wound. I looked around the living room, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, the worn armchair where David used to read, the faint scratches on the wooden floor from his childhood dog. Every corner held a memory, a precious shard of a life that was now irrevocably broken. "You're making a mistake, Stephanie," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You don't understand." She crossed her arms, a smug look on her face. "I understand perfectly. This house is valuable, and I'm not letting sentimentality get in the way of my future." Julian, ever the silent shadow, stood beside her, radiating an uncomfortable mix of awkwardness and barely concealed triumph. He shifted from foot to foot, avoiding my gaze. "Come on, Stephanie," he mumbled. "Let's just go." His unease did nothing to soften the blow of Stephanie's next words. "Sentimentality. You think I care about your sentiments? This house is my security, my ticket to a better life." Her words echoed the casual cruelty she had displayed ever since David's sudden passing, a stark contrast to the sweet, attentive facade she had maintained while he was alive. The mask had slipped, revealing a chilling ambition beneath. I drew myself up, forcing down the rising tide of grief and anger. "You're forgetting something, Stephanie," I said, my voice steadier now. "David's will hasn't been read yet." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly replaced by a dismissive wave of her hand. "That's just a formality. Everyone knows he left everything to me." She gestured towards the door. "Now, please, just go." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I will go," I said, picking up my small suitcase. "But I'll be back." Stephanie scoffed. "For what? To watch me redecorate?" I paused at the doorway, my hand on the doorknob. "For the reading of the will, and to see what Santa brings this Christmas." My words hung in the air, a cryptic promise. Stephanie's brow furrowed slightly, a hint of unease in her eyes. Julian tugged at her arm. "Come on, Stephanie. Let's just get out of here." As I stepped out into the rain, I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. The initial shock and despair had given way to a quiet resolve. I had been foolish to trust Stephanie, to believe in the image she had projected. But I was not broken. I had something she didn't. Knowledge. David had confided in me about his financial affairs, about the significant contribution I had made towards the purchase of this house years ago. A contribution Stephanie conveniently seemed to have forgotten. He'd also told me about a specific clause in his will, a clause designed to protect his family, a clause Stephanie clearly hadn't anticipated. The rain soaked through my thin coat as I walked away, the biting wind a physical manifestation of the hardship ahead. I was homeless, yes, but I was not defeated. I had a plan, and Christmas, just a few weeks away, was going to be a very interesting day indeed. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of a small, inexpensive motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over my head, a place to regroup, to prepare for the battle ahead. As the cab pulled away, I looked back at the house, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Stephanie may have thought she had won, but she was wrong. The game was far from over, and I, the grieving mother, was about to play my hand. Rain lashed against the Hampton Inn window, mirroring the tempest inside me. Worthless, Stephanie had sneered, just hours after the funeral, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing without David to provide for you." I stared at the swirling water in the plastic ice bucket, the cheap motel room a stark contrast to the life I once had, the life we had built. My fingers traced the rim of the bucket, numb with cold, just like my heart. I felt adrift, unmoored, tossed aside like a broken toy. How could things have unraveled so quickly 1 minute? David was there, his warm hand in mine, planning our retirement trip to Italy. The next, a sterile hospital room, the beep of machines replaced by the chilling silence of his absence. And then Stephanie, her face contorted with something I couldn't quite decipher. Not grief. No, not that. Was it relief? "You need to leave, Eleanor," she had said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "This is my house now. My house, the house David and I had poured our savings into, the house we'd painstakingly renovated, room by room, the garden where we'd planted roses, his favorite, now blurred image through the rain-streaked window of this desolate room. I helped pay for those renovations," I had pleaded, the words catching in my throat. "You have no claim," she'd snapped, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction. "Your old news, Eleanor. Julian and I have plans for this place, big plans." Julian, her fiancé, a man who'd always seemed charming enough, stood silently by, his gaze averted. I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes, but he said nothing. He offered no comfort, no support, just silent complicity. I pulled my worn cardigan tighter on me, the thin fabric offering little solace against the chill that seeped into my bones. The television flickered, casting an eerie glow across the room. I reached for the remote, the click echoing in the silence. News, politics, game shows. Nothing could distract me from the gnawing emptiness, the sense of profound loss that threatened to consume me. I picked up the phone, the cool plastic a stark reminder of my isolation. Who could I call? My friends, my family. They were all gone. David was gone. I was utterly alone. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, the small gesture heavy with defeat. What was the point? Who would want to hear the rambling woes of a grieving, dispossessed widow? A sudden knock startled me. I jumped, my heart pounding. Room service. No, too early. Cautiously, I opened the door, peering through the narrow gap. A young woman stood there, holding a large manila envelope. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" she asked, her voice professional and polite. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "I have a delivery for you," she said, extending the envelope towards me. "From Mr. Henderson's office." Mr. Henderson, David's lawyer. My fingers fumbled as I took the envelope, the weight of it strangely comforting. "Thank you," I managed, closing the door behind me. I tore open the envelope, my hands shaking. Inside, a thick stack of documents. David's will. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Stephanie's words echoed in my ears. "You have no claim." Had David really left me with nothing? I started to read, each word a pinprick against the numbness that had enveloped me. The standard legal jargon swam before my eyes, but then a sentence jumped out at me, a lifeline in the swirling sea of despair. Whereas my mother, Eleanor Vance, contributed significantly to the purchase and renovation of the aforementioned property. My breath caught in my throat. I read the sentence again, and then again, each time the words resonating with a growing sense of hope. David hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile I'd felt in days. The rain continued to batter the window, but now the sound seemed less menacing, more like a cleansing storm washing away the debris of grief and despair. Stephanie had underestimated me. She had underestimated David's love for me, and now it was my turn. I reached for the phone again, this time my hand steady, my purpose clear. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. I have a plan." The flickering television light caught the glint of determination in my eyes. Stephanie wanted a fight. She would get one. And this Christmas, she would learn that you don't mess with a mother's love. The Hampton Inn phone rang, jarring me awake. "Mrs. Caldwell," a crisp voice inquired. It was Mr. Henderson, David's lawyer. "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my office. Can you be there?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I wouldn't miss it. I hung up, the plastic receiver cool against my cheek. Tomorrow. After weeks of sleeping on cheap motel mattresses, after Stephanie's cruel laughter still echoed in my ears, tomorrow, everything would change. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, unable to focus on anything. Stephanie's words, "You're pathetic, clinging onto a life you no longer have," replayed endlessly in my mind. I'd been adrift, lost in a fog of grief and betrayal. Ever since David, ever since. I ordered room service, a bland chicken sandwich and lukewarm fries, but I could barely eat. All I could think about was the will, the house, the chance to finally reclaim some piece of my life. That night, sleep evaded me. I tossed and turned, replaying memories of David, his gap-toothed grin as a child, his awkward first dance at his wedding, his strong hug the last time I saw him. The tears came, hot and stinging. "Oh, David," I whispered into the darkness, "I miss you so much." But amidst the grief, a new resolve hardened within me. I wouldn't let Stephanie win. I wouldn't let her steal the memories, the house, the life we built together. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and my pearl necklace, a gift from David. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was older, wearier, but her eyes held a spark of determination I hadn't seen in weeks. It's time, I told my reflection. Time to face Stephanie. Time to take back what was rightfully mine. Mr. Henderson's office was a somber space, all darkwood and leather-bound books. Stephanie and Julian sat stiffly on a plush sofa, their faces carefully blank. Stephanie offered a curt nod, but Julian avoided my gaze. He'd always been a quiet man, but now his silence felt heavy with guilt. "Good morning," I said evenly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil within. They murmured a response, their eyes flickering towards the closed door of Mr. Henderson's office. The lawyer emerged a moment later, his expression grave. He gestured for us to sit, then began to read the will. The usual legalese washed over me, a blur of terms and conditions. Then he paused, clearing his throat. "Regarding the property at 12 Oakwood Lane," he said, his voice resonating in the hushed room, "David Caldwell leaves his share of the property to his mother, Eleanor Caldwell." Stephanie stiffened, her eyes widening in disbelief. But the house is mine," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "David left everything to me." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, his gaze steady. "That's where things get a bit complicated," he said. "The will clearly states that while David bequeaths his share of the property to you, Mrs. Stephanie Caldwell, the remaining 50% ownership of the house belongs to his mother, Eleanor Caldwell, due to her significant financial contributions towards the purchase of the property." Stephanie's face turned a mottled shade of red. "Financial contributions?" she sputtered. "She never paid a cent, actually," I said quietly, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. "I paid half the down payment on that house. David insisted, said it was a way to secure my future. I have the bank statements to prove it." I opened my handbag and produced a neatly folded envelope, placing it on the table. Mr. Henderson picked it up, his lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. The room was silent, the only sound the rustling of papers as Mr. Henderson examined the documents. Stephanie's face was a mask of fury, her hands clenched into fists. Julian, for his part, looked utterly bewildered. He turned to Stephanie, his brow furrowed. "Stephanie," he began, his voice low, Did you know about this?" Stephanie opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked from Julian to me, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, she let out a choked sob, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "It's not fair," she cried, her voice cracking. "It's my house." "No," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It's not. It's our house, and I'm here to stay." I met Stephanie's gaze, my own eyes unwavering. This wasn't just about the house. It was about justice. It was about honoring David's memory. And as I looked at Stephanie's shattered expression, I knew that I had finally won. And I added, a touch of steel entering my voice, "I'll be expecting you to vacate the premises by the end of the week, before Christmas." The color drained from Stephanie's face. This wasn't the Christmas she'd envisioned. This wasn't the victory she'd anticipated. And as the reality of her situation sunk in, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfaction. The mahogany table gleamed under the lawyer's lamp, a stark contrast to the dull ache in my chest. I sat quietly, hands clasped in my lap, listening to Mr. Henderson drone on about legal jargon. Stephanie and Julian sat across from me, radiating smug confidence. Stephanie even had the audacity to whisper, "Isn't this exciting, Julian? Our new beginning." Julian squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of pity and triumph. I offered a small, tight smile in return, my heart pounding with a strange mix of grief and anticipation. This was it, the day I'd been waiting for, the day the truth would finally come out, the day Stephanie's carefully constructed facade would crumble. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the three of us. "Now, as we've established, David's untimely passing has left us with the task of distributing his assets according to his last will and testament." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Before we proceed, I'd like to address a matter that has come to light during the probate process." Stephanie shifted in her seat, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I allowed myself a small, inward smile. It was starting. "It appears," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice gaining a subtle edge, "that Mrs. Eleanor Carter, David's mother, made significant financial contributions towards the purchase of the property currently occupied by Mrs. Stephanie Carter." Stephanie's eyes widened. "What?" she sputtered, her carefully applied makeup doing little to hide her rising color. "That's ridiculous. David bought that house. It's ours." Julian placed a calming hand on her arm, his expression a mask of confusion. Mr. Henderson held up a hand, silencing Stephanie's outburst. "Mrs. Carter, do you have documentation to support this claim?" He directed his question to me. "Yes, I do," I replied calmly, retrieving a folder from my bag. I slid the documents across the table: bank statements, transfer records, even emails between David and me discussing my contribution. My son had always insisted I keep meticulous records. He'd never imagined they'd be used like this, of course, but I was grateful for his foresight. Stephanie's face drained of color as she scanned the papers. Julian leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room was thick with tension, broken only by the rustle of the documents and Stephanie's sharp intake of breaths. This can't be," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "David never told me." Mr. Henderson looked at Stephanie, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Carter, it seems your late husband neglected to inform you of his mother's considerable investment in the property." He turned back to me, a hint of apology in his voice. "Mrs. Eleanor Carter, your contribution to the purchase of the house entitles you to a significant portion of its value, as stipulated in David's will in such a circumstance." He then read the relevant clause, outlining the percentage I was entitled to, a considerable sum, enough to ensure my comfort and security for the rest of my life. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, about exposing Stephanie's lies. Stephanie's composure finally shattered. "No," she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "This is wrong. It's my house. He promised it to me." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her carefully crafted image. Julian, looking stunned, tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, her eyes burning with anger and disbelief. "I'm afraid, Mrs. Carter," Mr. Henderson said firmly, "that the legal documentation speaks for itself." He turned to me, a small smile playing on his lips. "Congratulations, Mrs. Eleanor Carter. It seems you'll be spending Christmas in your own home after all." My own eyes welled up, but these were tears of relief, of vindication. I looked at Stephanie, her face contorted in a mask of rage and despair. She had tried to steal my son's legacy, to erase my contribution, to leave me with nothing. But she had failed. I had won. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, a quiet strength settling over me. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "I believe I'll be taking a look at the Christmas decorations in the attic. It's been far too long." I glanced at Stephanie one last time, a small, almost imperceptible smile gracing my lips. I had faced the worst, and I had emerged victorious. The house was mine again, and this Christmas I would be home.